Hey, Run Elite, Andrew Snow here. Now today we're talking about salt. When I made this video here, I talked about a number of things that you can do to really increase your performance. Now, one of the things that I said in that video was to decrease your salt intake. In fact, I even said don't take any additional salt. Now, I stand behind that, but a lot of comments on that video were saying things like, don't you know that you need salt? It's an essential electrolyte, and without salt, we wouldn't be able to contract our heart and contract our muscles. Yes, I do know this. My claim is that we should not have additional salt. And I'm gonna go as far as to say no additional salt. There is salt in the foods that we eat, but having salt from the salt shaker, salt in our processed foods, and certainly electrolyte drinks, things like this, they're not as good for you as you think. In fact, I'm gonna share with you in this video the effects that salt has on your health, on your longevity, on the state of your ability to be able to perform well and recover well as an athlete. And I think you're gonna love this. I do ask you to keep an open mind here. I'm gonna back everything up that I say with the research. I'm gonna put it up on the screen and I'm gonna leave links below so that you can fact check any of this if you want. Are you ready? Keep an open mind, because by the time you reach the end of this video, I think you're gonna be thinking about how we assault our bodies. Let's take a moment here to talk about something that's really important, and that is reductionism. Reductionism means that if we have a thing and we reduce it into its parts, that if we understand those parts and we understand each and every part, that we understand the whole thing. That is called reductionism, and it doesn't work in nutrition. And it's really important when we talk about salt. It's actually really important when we talk about anything with nutrition. Now, the thing that opened my eyes to this idea was this book here. It's called Whole, Rethinking the Modern Science of Nutrition by T. Colin Campbell. It was actually the book that made me change my diet overnight and go cold turkey. But the idea is this: if you have a food such as a banana, people might say something like, oh, that has a lot of sugar in it, or whatever. So the banana is made up of all sorts of stuff. Sure, there's carbohydrates, different kinds of carbohydrates. There's protein, there's fat, there's enzymes, there's fiber, there's water, there's minerals, vitamins, all kinds of stuff. The laundry list is actually quite long. Now, if we take that massive laundry list and someone said, what did you have for lunch today? And you listed out the amino acids and the fatty acids and the minerals and the fibers and all these things. If you listed all that out, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Or you could just say, I had a banana, because a banana is one ingredient. So if we talk about something like salt, salt is extracted from other things. Now, you're not likely to find banana salt, but you can find sea salt or whatever. Salt isn't grown on a tree or existing in nature unless you're looking at something like a dried up salt bed, mineral bed, like a lake bed or something like that that has salt. Sure, but there are foods which contain salt. So when we're talking about salt here, I'm not talking about having no salt, because in your foods, there is salt. So it wouldn't be correct to say not to have any salt, but that would be in a reductionist mindset, because you might have a banana, which has potassium, for example, but we're not taking a potassium pill. We're taking one ingredient, and that is banana, and there's potassium in it. There's also salt in the foods that we eat. So when I say no salt, I mean no salt. But I don't mean no foods which contain salts. But the good news is that basically all the foods that you could eat are going to contain salt. So I really want to be clear on that here. We're talking about no additional salt, not the natural salt that occurs in foods, which is enough salt for us to thrive. If you think about animals in nature, they're not having this, they're having this, or replace this with whatever other food that you want, and there's salt in it. So we do need salt. It's essential for our muscle contractions, for sending signals down our nerve pathways, for all of that stuff. Yeah, but it doesn't require this. When asking runners if salt is good for them, most will say that it's not only good, but it's essential. They'll talk about their needs for electrolytes, and they'll claim that when running long distances, they sweat out a lot of salt, and that salt is essential for muscular contraction, and in fact that we need salt. And in a way, they'd be right, sort of. It is true that salt is an essential electrolyte, and it's required for muscular contraction and for sending signals through the nerves, but we can't therefore conclude that taking additional salt on our diet is beneficial. Salt exists in the foods that we eat, and in adequate quantities. In fact, in optimal quantities that are far lower than the average that the American gets per day. and even far lower than the average healthy eater gets in a day. So let's dive into the research, and I'm going to show just how detrimental salt is to your diet, and then we'll dive into how it impedes our athletic performance and our recovery, and we'll finish with the logic behind salt intake. Salt in your health. Reducing salt by just 15% per day would cut up to 8.5 million deaths worldwide each year. Cutting just half a teaspoon of salt a day from the diet, which is easily done through low salt foods or simply not adding salt to our food, basically a modest reduction, could prevent 22% of deaths from stroke and 16% of heart attacks resulting in death. Being that heart disease is the #1 killer in the developed world and stroke ranks in the top 5, see the CDC right here, cutting these deaths by a small percentage has a huge effect on improving health and the lives of people around the world. Modest reduction of salt in the diet is a strategy that's effective, if not more than even quitting smoking, or even weight reduction. It's even more effective than reducing blood pressure than medication. And yes, that is super impactful. And this modest reduction of just half a teaspoon of salt per day isn't even getting down to the recommended levels. It's a minor change that, even though only moves the needle a little bit with salt intake, it has a huge effect. Here is a graph showing the average amount of salt intake of men and women and the recommended maximum, which is 5.8 grams per day, which is exceeded by most Americans. And the recommended maximum for people with hypertension or anyone over the age of 40 is even less at 3.8 grams per day. Now, when we look at this graph here, it shows that on average, everyone over the age of 3 dramatically exceeds the maximum salt recommendations. If you look here, you can see two lines. You see at 3.8 and 5.8. 5.8 is the maximum amount that is recommended for anybody at any time. And everybody, except for toddlers, is well over that, men especially. But if you have hypertension or you're even just over 40, we want that line to be even lower. And you see the second line that is 3.8 grams per day. And literally every population is well in excess of that. I speak with a lot of athletes, and when I ask about salt intake, most reply by saying that, well, I don't add salt to my foods. But a full 75% of dietary salt doesn't come from the salt shaker, but it comes from eating processed foods. If you ask people to name the foods where Americans get most of their salt, most would say things like soup, potato chips, pretzels, but the main source of all salt in adults 20 to 50 years old is, drumroll please, chicken. Now, if you take a look at this graph here, this ranks by age. So you're probably either in the 12 to 19 or most likely 20 to 50 age group here. So that's that third column over. Let's look there. Where does most of the salt come from? Well, pizza is pretty high. Yeast bread is pretty high. Pasta and pasta dishes are pretty high. But the one that takes the cake is chicken and chicken mixed dishes. In younger people, 12 to 19, it's actually pizza. But any way you slice the pizza graph of dietary salt intake, what's clear is that most salt is coming from meat, processed or not, and breads or wheat products. So perhaps the highest salt intake that you could possibly get would come from pizza with chicken. We have, well, our yeast bread, we have cheese, which is exorbitantly high in salt, and chicken, the leading contributor of salt. America's favorite dish is a symphony of high salt ingredients, all combined into one delectably stimulating and health impeding potion. Chicken. You might say, I don't add salt to my chicken, but chicken is the highest offender because of all the salt and additives that are literally injected into the meat to make it hyperpalatable. In general, animal foods contain significantly more salt than plant foods. In order to achieve optimal, which is low, salt intake levels, a sharp change in dietary habits is necessary. And a diet that's high in things like vegetables, fruit, beans, whole grains, and low, or lower at least, in meats, processed grains is essential. So, how do vegetarians stack up against American dieters? This is going to be a surprise for you. The US Dietary Guidelines recommends getting under 2,300 milligrams per day, and that's from the FDA. And the American Heart Association says, no way, get under 1,500 milligrams per day, direct from the American Heart Association. But even vegetarians, although they do a little bit better, they still get double the recommended allowance at nearly 3,500 milligrams of sodium per day. But the only population who is actually getting under the daily recommended maximums are those who embrace a fully plant-centered diet. Vegans. Now, I know that's a trigger word for a lot of people on here, but here are the facts. This is because those who choose a plant-centered dietary lifestyle, although I guess they could binge on Oreos. Yeah, Oreos actually are vegan. Potato chips, processed vegan meats. Generally, those who choose the healthier route choose whole plants like fruits, vegetables, starches, beans, nuts, and seeds. This dietary approach is called a whole food, plant-based diet. and it's researched very well in the literature, and I'll be mentioning it again in future videos. But if you're interested in a WFPB diet, I suggest picking up T. Colin Campbell's book, The China Study. He's the one who kind of coined the term, at least I think so. But let's move on. Now, we're going to talk about salt and endothelial health. This is really important because here's where it starts to really apply directly to your running. So listen up. If you made it this far already, I applaud you. And now we're going to make it specific about your running. If you put people on a low salt diet, meaning that they get only twice the amount of the daily recommendation, you get a significant improvement in artery function. And the researchers suggest that the impact of lowering salt in the diet goes beyond just regulating blood pressure. Because even after reducing salt intake for just 2 days, massive health benefits were seen in the endothelial cells. So what is an endothelial cell? Your endothelial cells are a single layer of cells which line your blood vessels, and they regulate the exchange of material from the bloodstream into the tissues of your body. The endothelial cells are the main way which blood vessels can relax and open up. We call that vasodilation. When you have an artery, whoop, and it gets bigger like that, that's vasodilation. The endothelial cells are what do that. When you relax a blood vessel, you can send more blood to, well, wherever you need, right? You open up the blood vessel, you can get more blood where you need it. This is a good idea for runners. When you're running, you need to send more blood to your working muscles. After a run, you probably want to recover too, right? And increasing blood flow to the fatigued muscles after a run helps deliver more nutrients, flush out waste. In other words, your ability to increase blood flow to your working muscles is absolutely essential for both performance and recovery. And to increase blood flow, you need to have functioning endothelial cells. And endothelial cells need nitric oxide in order to dilate. Fun fact, this is actually how Viagra works. When you take Viagra, it increases the production of nitric oxide, and therefore you can dilate blood vessels to deliver blood where you need it. So thus, you need nitric oxide in order to perform and recover your tissues. If that hasn't convinced you yet that you must have high levels of nitric oxide, consider that not only does nitric oxide govern your ability to distribute blood and the contents of your blood to your body, but it also controls how much oxygen can be used in the mitochondria. It does this through inhibiting cytochrome C oxidase. If you're an endurance athlete, and even if you're not, being able to use oxygen and create energy through metabolism, through what we call the Krebs cycle, is super important. And one of the main limiters of how much you can utilize the mitochondria that you already have is the presence of nitric oxide in order to literally shuttle oxygen to the mitochondria. So the last thing we want to do is impede our endothelial cells or impede our nitric oxide production. So how does salt hurt this process? Dickinson's right here showed that even just one single meal high in salt was enough to compromise endothelial cell function. And even a common meal's worth of salt can significantly suppress brachial artery function in as little as 30 minutes. So if you're eating salt, it's going to restrict your blood flow, restrict your endothelial cell production because you're not making nitric oxide. And in as little as 30 minutes, you have impeded your athletic performance. Take a look at this graph here. Here's what happens when just a pinch of added salt is added to a meal. And then what happens 30, 60, 90, and 120 minutes to your artery function. And then here is the same meal, but with only a quarter teaspoon of salt, the white line. The effect of reducing salt is critical for endothelial cell health. Now, check out this graph here. There are some people, check out on the left, who aren't experiencing high blood pressure despite consuming a lot of salt. In fact, there's a percentage of the population who don't have adverse blood pressure reactions to taking high amounts of salt. But now look over on the right. Even those people who didn't have the high blood pressure, they still experienced impaired blood vessel dilation due to the damage to the endothelial cells. And that endothelial assault doesn't only affect the major arteries, it trickles down into even the smallest blood vessels, the little ones where oxygen exchange happens. We call those the capillaries. Greeny and colleagues here, they took a bunch of participants and they warmed them up in a hot bath in order to measure how much the blood vessels on their skin would dilate. And in the image here, you can see that the black bar shows the participant's capillary diameter before the warm bath. So look at that black bar on the left, and after, look at the black bar on the right. Big difference, right? And you can see that there was significant dilation. But the participants who received salt, the white bar on the left, you can see that they not only started with more narrow diameter of their blood vessels, but when they were exposed to the warm water, the dilation capabilities of their capillaries were significantly impaired. That's the white bar on the right. So we know that even tiny small amounts of salt both contribute to increased blood pressure and ubiquitously increase to damaging the endothelial cells, which in turn compromises our ability to dilate our blood vessels. That's not good news for you if you want to run, which of course benefits from sending more blood to the working muscles, but also for your recovery, which also demands an increase of blood flow to recovering tissues. But here's a real head scratcher for you. Ready? Here's that same image again, but there's another bar here. Even when the participants had the salt and the impede artery function, some of them were given a vitamin C injection under their skin. And this is the line all the way to the right, the striped line. It turns out that the salt produces a heavy oxidative stress in our body, and in turn, it produces inflammation. Now, this can be combated with the presence of antioxidants in the blood. Vitamin C is an antioxidant. So a person could theoretically eat a high salt diet, low in antioxidants, and then just inject themselves with vitamin C under their skin every day after every meal. Or I'd like to avoid the needle, and instead you could simply just eat a low salt and an antioxidant rich diet. And antioxidants come from, drumroll please, plants. Now, it isn't just vitamin C. Potassium has also been shown to soften, i.e. the opposite of harden, our arteries, while sodium stiffens the arteries and reduces nitric oxide release. And the more salt there is, the less nitric oxide is produced. So if you want to run and recover well, ditch the salt. But it's more than just about not hurting your endothelial cells. You want to maximize your endothelial cell function through the consumption of nitric oxide forming foods. So here is a graph for you that's beautifully done, credit to Michael Greger here, of the foods that are most contributing to nitric oxide production. And we'll go through each of them. As you look at this here, I'm going to go from the least to the most. And this is in milligrams per 100 grams of food. So kale, pretty good at 27. Beets, even better. You've probably heard about taking beets for athletic performance, and it's true because it produces nitric oxide, but we can do even better. Swiss chard at 151, oak leaf lettuce at 155, beet greens at 177. So if you're going to eat the beets, maybe eat the beet greens too. Basil at 183, spring greens, butterleaf lettuce, cilantro is super high, 247, beet juice even. And then we get to our top two, rhubarb, and the one that takes the cake is arugula at 480 milligrams per 100 grams. Now that's a lot. So maybe screenshot that or write them down. But what I've done with this is I just eat greens 5 to 6 times per day. And I have a lot of arugula because I like it. I have a lot of spinach because I like it. And I have a couple of these other things. I eat some cilantro, but not like buckets of it. I'm not gonna have a cilantro salad, but I will have an arugula and spinach salad. Okay, now the big one. We're talking about hydration, hyponatremia, and electrolyte supplementation. Now I know you wanted me to get here. I told you I'd get here. Okay, this is gonna piss a lot of people off, but my goal isn't to piss you off. It's to show you that maybe you should be pissed off at what you've been told about taking electrolytes and drinking water. But we're gonna need to take this step by step to fully understand it. So lock in and go on this ride with me. The discovery that sodium transportation and glucose transportation are coupled in the small intestine so that glucose actually accelerates the absorption of solute and water. It was hailed as being potentially one of the most important medical advances in the 20th century. I mean, literally, here it is up on the screen. It was hailed as one of the greatest medical advances. Why? Because it's a cheap and easy way to hydrate kids that were dying because they had diarrhea. If you have diarrhea, you're probably going to be dehydrated, and this was a way to increase and maximize hydration. And we're off to a good start. So sport drinks really jumped on the bandwagon, and they started making beverages that have, well, electrolytes and sugar, things like Gatorade. So doesn't dehydration hurt your performance? I want you to think about that for a second. I mean, logically, at the end of a marathon, even someone who just set a world record, they're going to be more dehydrated than they were when they started. But they just set a world record. So the best performances we've ever seen set in a state of somewhat dehydration. It's an interesting question, but let's dive into it here. There was a study that was done during an Ironman triathlon that showed surprisingly higher levels of dehydration were not associated with slower finishing times. There wasn't a correlation between dehydration and marathon finishing times. In fact, some who lost the most water had among the fastest times. That's Sharwood. You can see that right here. Your body isn't stupid. It'll tell you when you need to drink. The Journal of Physiology of Sports Medicine found that fluid consumption during exercise should actually be just based on thirst. And there's an evolutionarily developed and precisely regulated mechanism that protects plasma osmolality and circulating blood volume. And now there's ample evidence that drinking to thirst even during prolonged exercise, even under hot conditions, will allow maintenance of proper hydration. And you do not need to drink your electrolytes. Supplemental sodium has been demonstrated to not be necessary during prolonged exercise, even under hot conditions for up to 30 hours. That's Hoffman here. We think that if we're sweating and drinking just pure water, that will dilute our electrolytes and we'll start to cramp and maybe get dehydrated, and it might lead to hyponatremia. But exercise-associated hyponatremia is caused by drinking too much of any fluid, be it water or sport drink. Intake volumes greater than that lost through sweating, respiration, and renal excretion, your kidneys basically, so that a positive fluid balance accrues over time, that's what causes these problems. So, how do we prevent hyponatremia? It's simple. Just drink to thirst. And we've known this since 1991. That year, definitive evidence that exercise-associated hyponatremia is caused by abnormal fluid retention in those who overdrink during prolonged exercise. But this finding was ignored. Instead of publicizing the findings, in 1996, the American College of Sports Medicine, the ACSM, promoted the concept that athletes should drink as much as tolerable during exercise. But it turns out, follow the money, it turns out that the authors of these papers, they received funding from, you guessed it. Let's take a look here. Let's see, Gatorade Sports Science Institute, Gatorade Sports Science Institute Science Advisory Board, Gatorade Science Institute, Gatorade Sport Science Institute, the Coca-Cola Company, and finally, Gatorade Sport Science Institute. Funding these, well, of course they're going to conclude that we should drink Gatorade. I can say from personal experience, now look, I want to provide the evidence to you here, but take a side note, just on my own personal experience, I've run a 100-mile race in the desert. It was at the Javelina 100 in 2023, and I took no fabricated sports drinks. I didn't take any salt pills. I drank, that's for sure, and I ate food. And my food contained electrolytes and sodium. But I didn't add any to it. I had, let's see, a lot of watermelon. I had a lot of watermelon juice. I ate 2 boxes of tomatoes. I had some bananas. I had dates. I had a few apples. And I was fine. But not only did I not cramp and blow up and get hyponatremic, but the last 10 miles of my race were the fastest 10 miles of the whole 100 miles. Now, I'm not here to boast about ultra running, but I am here to tell you, if I don't eat any salt whatsoever, just what's in my food, and I can run 100 miles in the desert and not cramp, doesn't that make you think that it's not necessary to take an additional salt? Now, it actually is for some people, and we're actually going to go into the cases where taking salt actually seems to benefit you, and I'm going to break that down for you too. We'll conclude with that. So let's talk about cramping. Cramping too is not caused by dehydration. A 2019 study published in Sports Medicine, it showed 2 things here, okay? There is some experimental evidence that individual athletes, here it is, who lose large amounts of salt in their sweat may be more prone to cramps. And a little bit further down on the page, we can see a higher sweat sodium concentration was one of the contributors. So if you sweat out a lot of salt, you may be at risk for cramping. But why are you sweating out a lot of salt? Cramping is caused by 2 main drivers: the excess secretion of salt and underconditioning. So let's just assume that I'm not going to tell you here to just get more fit. I mean, you could do that and that would help, but let's go into the excess excretion of salt, because that's probably what you're worried about maybe in your marathon. Now, we have a hormone secreted by our adrenal gland. It's called aldosterone. Now, aldosterone acts to hold on to salt in the body so that we don't pee it all out. If you think about ancient man who didn't have access to a salt shaker, they still need salt. And so it's a good idea if their body is good at holding on to salt. And that's what aldosterone does. But as we eat more and more and more salt, our bodies go into salt overload, and we need to excrete it through our sweat, through our urine. And this consistent ingestion of added salt leads to a downregulation of aldosterone. After all, if there's excess salt in the diet, we shouldn't try to hold on to it. We would just be bloated with salt. So aldosterone gets downregulated so much that we're constantly excreting salt. Your aldosterone goes down. Now you're just going to excrete it all the time. Salt in, salt out. Salt in, salt out. That's what we're doing all the time. And this right here is the setup for us to rapidly lose a lot of salt when exercising hard. But the solution isn't to put a Band-Aid on it and just supplement with salt during a race. The solution is to reduce salt in the diet below 1,500 milligrams per day. And then we're able to hold on to our necessary salt, excrete less, and cramp less. Now here's the basic logic between all of this. I gave you a bunch of science, I gave you a bunch of research. Let's just think about this for a second. Okay, if a sailor were stranded at sea and they're just baking out in the sun all day, they probably desperately want to stay hydrated. But we know that if they drink the seawater, they're going to become even more dehydrated. Why? Well, because there's a lot of salt in the seawater. So we know that salt in water, seawater, is poisonous, will kill us. It's way too much salt. But for some reason, we can go to the grocery store and buy sea salt. Now that's even more concentrated. Not only will the seawater be too concentrated in salt, but we take out the water, leave just the salt behind, put it in a package, and then add it to our food. And by the way, the food we're eating, if it's cooked, it's been dehydrated. If you take carrots and eat them raw, okay, there's some water in there. If you take those carrots and you bake them, there's less water in there. Okay? Anytime you cook a food, you're taking water out of it. So we take a food, we remove water out of it, and then we take salt and add it to it. Can you see the problem here? And in a life where we consume far too much salt already, taking that additional salt in our food, it's not necessary. Even if it were. Okay, bear with me here, because even if it were, let's not try to supersede Mother Nature by taking just sodium chloride. Now, if you ask someone what salt is, they'll most likely say sodium chloride. But it's not just sodium chloride. There are lots of different kinds of salt, such as potassium chloride, which tastes salty, but it's not sodium chloride. Most Americans get far too much sodium chloride in their diet. It's about 98% of Americans. But also, about the same percentage, about 98% of Americans get not enough potassium. So here's an idea for you. What if we were to shift the scales and we swap out some sodium chloride and we put in some potassium chloride? You'd still get a little bit of saltiness in your food, but we'd be taking out the thing that you get way too much of, and we'd be putting in the thing that you're not getting enough of. Earlier in this video, I alluded to potassium chloride supplements as being used to actually relax the arteries and increase nitric oxide production. So this is a really good swap to make, and it's not gonna make that much difference for you. And this is exactly what the researchers did in 2016 as a technique to cut sodium from people's diets. Check this out here. When they made this swap from sodium chloride to potassium chloride, they had a decrease in hypertension. So if you want to improve your performance, increase your recovery, decrease hypertension, decrease your stroke risk, improve your life expectancy, minimize cramping, reduce your weight, stop paralyzing your endothelial cells, and stop inhibiting how much oxygen can make it to the mitochondria, then consider reducing your dietary intake of salt, specifically sodium chloride. The research at the start of this video shows that even a modest 1/4 teaspoon to a 1/2 teaspoon less per day of salt is enough to have a huge health implication for you. So if you can get down to 1,500 milligrams per day, you're gonna do even better. And honestly, I'll just tell you that of the people who I coach, getting salt out of the diet is probably one of the more difficult things to do. It's really addictive. Remember those Lay's potato chip commercials that say, bet you can't eat just one? They're saying that not because the fried potato tastes that good, but because it's coated in salt. And if you just have one potato chip, you instantly want more and more and more and more, and you could eat the whole bag. It's hyper addictive. And if you cut salt completely out of your diet like that, you're probably gonna have a period where you don't feel all that great. The things that you might expect would be, number one, you get intense cravings for salt and you feel bad. And if you ate something salty, you would then feel good. It's an addiction. It's a dopamine detox from the salt, which lights your brain up. So you could do that, but I don't recommend it. I'd recommend just reduce a 1/4 teaspoon of salt a day, and then maybe again and again, and aim to get down to 1,500 milligrams per day, which is quite low compared with you and basically everybody you probably know. Everybody's eating more than that. So you're gonna have maybe different food, but is it worth it? Even if you don't get that far, maybe a small gain, you'll notice a difference in your performance, in your recovery. And I hope for you that this will improve your life over the long term by avoiding things like stroke, heart disease, endothelial paralysis. And that's my message for you. So I did hope that you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching. Hey, I really hope that you enjoyed that video. Do me a favor, if you got something from it, give the video a like, leave a comment below, because I'd love to go even deeper on this topic with you all. I do have a nutrition book that I'm working on. It's not going to be out for probably at least a year, but this is something I'm really passionate about. It really does move the needle for a lot of my runners. One of my runners is 62 years old, and his name's Eric, and he just set a PR, a lifetime PR in the 5K and the 1 mile. So I'm going to give him a little shout out here. Because a lot of my runners, they set PRs in the half marathon and the marathon, even in their 50s, some even in their 60s. But when we think about those short distances, it's much less common, isn't it? Well, I want you to hear some of the success that you can have if you train in a proper way, and you eat in a proper way, and you sleep in a proper way. You really can go really far, really late in your life. So if you got something from this, stay tuned for the next one. Please like, leave a comment, subscribe if you're not already. About half of the people who view the Running Elite videos, they're not yet subscribed. So maybe that's you, and I'd appreciate if you come back for our next video. I'd love to converse with you there. Take care. Bye-bye.